Welcome to the first episode of a brand new series where we take a look at interesting maps, data, and just geek out over it. So stick around, see if you enjoy the content. If you do, I appreciate a like, subscribe for more, and let's do this. Okay, so I came across this post on Reddit, r/dataisbeautiful, one of my top subreddits. So this is 2021 carbon dioxide emissions tons per capita, and the percent change they give is relative to the year 2000. So when it comes to the absolute worst offender in terms of CO2 tons per capita, it is Qatar at 32.65, although this is down 43% from the reference year of 2000. And Qatar being the number one worst offender kind of makes sense because they are a small country in terms of population, and their entire economy is based off of the oil industry. In fact, when it comes to many of the worst polluters per capita, many of these are in the Middle East and they're small, oil-rich countries. Except number two, this is Trinidad and Tobago. Trinidad and Tobago is one of the wealthiest countries in the Caribbean thanks to its large reserves of oil and gas, the exploitation of which dominates its economy. Okay, that makes sense. If we move down the list a little bit and look for something a bit more interesting, the first thing that stands out to me is actually Australia. And the reason why Australia stands out to me is because it is a modern, Western, liberal democracy. And currently, those are the countries doing the most to mitigate future impacts of climate change. And we do see that here. So since the reference year of 2000, the CO2 per capita is down 16.7%. But to fully understand why Australia, of all places, is one of the worst polluters per capita, we need to look at two other data sets. The first one is a global population density map. This shows where people in the world live. And when it comes to Australia, essentially nobody lives here. It is very underpopulated. In fact, the total population of this country is just 25.7 million. California, a state, is 39.24 million. And the second important data set is GDP, or the output of the country. So here we can see that the United States is the single largest contributor at 22.94 trillion. China contributes almost 17 trillion, and countries like the UK, 3.11 trillion. And Australia is right here at $1.61 trillion. They dominate the GDP of Oceania. So to put it simply, when you have a small population and a high GDP, or economic output, the CO2 emissions per capita is going to be skewed up. In fact, I'm sure there's a correlation between CO2 levels and GDP. Okay, so on average, a 1% change in GDP leads to a 0.072 change in CO2 emissions. Oh, and they actually included the world average right here at 4.74 tons per capita, and unfortunately, since the year 2000, it is up 13.8%. Now, before going, I do have to see who is the smallest polluter per capita. So here I see the Dominican Republic of the Congo. Okay, that kind of makes sense. That is a very underdeveloped country. Now, the DRC does have a large and fast-growing population at 92.38 million people. Their GDP is growing at 53.96 billion USD, but that does leave the Congo ranked 141 in terms of their GDP and 16th in the world when ranked by population. So the DRC is essentially the inverse of a country like Australia. It has a high population and a very low economic output, which we know is correlated to less CO2 emissions. I did notice a trend I want to share with you guys, and that is that the smaller countries tend to be increasing their CO2 per capita as they develop and increase their GDP, and countries which are more rich on the higher end of the scale, I do see more reductions and negative figures on this side of the data. So for example, Qatar, the number one worst offender, is down 43% from the base year of 2000. As we saw, the world average is still increasing, but we can see here that most of the growth in CO2 emissions per capita was between the year 2000 and 2010. Since 2010, they've largely been flat. So hopefully in another 10 years, we can see an updated version of this data set with a lot more negative numbers. But that's it for this one. If you guys want to see more, make sure to subscribe, leave a like, and I'll see you in the next one.